Greetings and salutations, I'm Naka, and I wanted to talk about why I play video games. Not like why games are important to me or why I choose to play them, but what kind of experience I'm looking for when I play a game. At the end of Earthbound, I talked about why I liked that game so much, and there was one major point I only grazed over, but got me thinking, and that was personal taste. I don't really play games for the characters or their backstories, so the simple characters of Earthbound didn't bother me. Earthbound's overall plot is serviceable, but isn't world-changing either, so why do I like it? It's the world, the setting, but there's more to it than that. Let's look at this from a different angle. Instead of trying to explain why a specific game appeals to me, what do I look for in games in the first place? Predominantly, I want to explore, to find neat places and neat things, to wonder where a path goes or what a landmark is, and then go find out. This is probably why I like Metroidvanias and Zelda-like so much, but there are a lot of Metroidvanias I don't like, and a lot of games I do like that aren't Metroidvanias. I like poking my nose around and fighting secrets and cool prizes, to be curious and be able to satisfy that curiosity. Open world games are great because everything is new and mysterious and everything you find is a mystery to investigate. I loved Breath of the Wild and Fallout 4 for this. I can just take off running, go places I'm probably not supposed to go, knowing that even fancier things will be there. The problem with open world games, though, is as you play them, the mysteries of the world are laid bare. You learn what kind of prizes and locations are there for you, and you lose interest because I've got a pretty good idea what I'll find before I even go there. It's hard to keep fresh when the entire world is open at the start. I've mentioned my dislike of Metroid Fusion, and I think this is because they do a lot to detract from that feeling of exploration. They push a lot of text and story on you, which just delays me from exploring, and they point out exactly where you're going and what you'll be getting there, so there's no surprise and little freedom to go where I want. A bit of story is a good thing, though. I want to have a reason to go do the things I'm doing, to be tied to the world in an important way. Super Metroid, on the other hand, is very different. Aside from an initial setup, there's almost no mid-game story. It's just you exploring, but with purpose. They also don't tell you where to go or what to get. Something else to point out is a game can be very linear and still give this feeling. Even without sequence breaks or fancy tricks, Super Metroid would still feel like you were exploring all on your own terms and going somewhere because you wanted to go there or felt like you might find something cool. A very linear game can still feel very explorative. It's all about how progression is handed to the player. You can't, of course, go too far in the other direction, like many old NES games where you were expected to ram your head against every wall for days on end before you accidentally find the answer. I'll accept some blame myself, but I've encountered this more than a few times when streaming Chrysalis, where I had to rely on the chat telling me where to go, and when they told me, I never would have thought of doing that. If exploration is what interests me the most, then it's important that the world is interesting on both a large and small scale. Earthbound does this well in the large scale. It's a large world filled with life and joy, and everywhere you poke your nose, you see another little tidbit fleshing out the world. This is also why I prefer AM2R to Samus Returns. Visually, AM2R is really varied, with a distinct aesthetic and flow to the rooms. Samus Returns, on the other hand, just felt like everything looked the same, and it didn't flow in a memorable way. One of the most obvious things to me was the puzzle rooms, which felt completely interchangeable with each other, and took you out of the flow, but were required just to get around. Super Metroid, on the other hand, had amazing flow with distinct aesthetics, landmarks, highways, and side rows. It had a few interchangeable puzzle rooms, but they all had a unique aesthetic to them, so you knew what you were getting into, were relatively simple by comparison, and they were all side challenges. So they felt like something you tackled of your own will with a nice reward or to further explore off the beaten path. Of course you want to find something, be rewarded for your exploration, but this doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be a shortcut, or a missile expansion, or a neat vista, or even a funny joke. One reason I like Earthbound so much is because of how much world there is and how much of it you have to explore. The game will hint where you need to go next, but won't often lead you outright. So even just exploring town and talking to NPCs to get a hint feels like you're discovering what to do. Onet is really good at this, the way you have to go get to Giant Step, where you find the mayor's locked it up, so you go talk to the mayor, who won't let you in but complains about the sharks, so you have to go find where the sharks are and beat up their leader, then backtrack through all of that to actually get in. And I don't think a lot of that was even required. I think you could just walk straight down and beat up Frankie. This could have felt very leading, too, with someone telling you outright from the start that you had to go beat up Frankie, and then telling you where he was. Instead, they let you figure all that out on your own. Even in exploring dungeons, they're often linear, but not obviously so, with twisting paths and side rooms. I really enjoy Stonehenge Base because it wasn't easy to tell which way was the right way, and side paths usually reward you with a healing item or something simple, so you still felt like you accomplished something. And you wanted to get those items because they were there to get. The linear nature of the game meant you were always going to new towns, with new people to talk to and new dungeons to enter, so it never got stale like open world games. This is also why I like Dragon Quest Builders. It's open world, but revealed piecewise, so it stays fresh. The game gives you a lot of specific tasks, but leaves how you go about them up to you, from attacking a stronghold to building a town, so it doesn't feel as leading. Surprisingly, exploration is the main reason I like Doom. I don't play on the harder difficulties because I'm not as concerned with the combat. I mostly want to explore the sprawling maps, see what leads where, find that fancy gun or key or even locked door so I can remember to come back later. As much as I enjoyed Doom 2016, the more linear levels and focus on combat is why I don't look back on it as something I would be super enthusiastic about playing again, and I feel like that's put a damper on some of my enthusiasm for Doom Eternal. Difficulty, which I just touched on, is another personal preference, separate from exploration. Some people play games because they want to be challenged, and want the satisfaction of overcoming that challenge. While I'm not immune to this, my day is busy and stressful enough already that when I play a game, I want to relax. So I generally prefer easier games. They can be too easy, though. If you can click your way through without worry or thought, the whole experience is just boring. I'm not really looking for challenge, but it does still need to be engaging. I'm reminded of Shipwreck, where the overworld is completely devoid of enemies and becomes a chore to travel through just because of how uneventful it is. This is also why I don't like fighting games, as the emphasis is entirely on overcoming a challenge. And what better than another human equipped equally to yourself? If I am going to do something harder, I enjoy difficulty in the form of a mechanics dance, where every action of the enemy has a distinct response you should respond with. The fights in Final Fantasy XIV are almost all like this, and they become a challenge of figuring out what the correct response is, and then getting all your responses right over the course of the fight. Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight is like this as well, and why I actually was enthusiastic about doing the no-hit boss fights. It was about figuring out what the correct response was, and then an exercise in actually getting your responses correct. Playing games this difficult really wears me down though, and I can't keep it up long term, which is why I haven't even finished a lot of harder games that I remember enjoying the start of. In games that give me a lot of options and variety, I find I always gravitate towards just a handful that all serve distinct purposes. This was apparent in Mega Man Legends, where I was just using the Buster and Drill Arm for going a lot of the other sub-weapons. The Buster worked for combat in almost every situation, so I didn't see a specific situation that would require a different sub-weapon. I think of each weapon, or item, or spell as a different shaped peg, and try to find the right shaped hole to put it in. In a lot of Doom weapon mods, they give weapons a secondary fire, and I will almost never use them since they're mostly there for variety. The base weapons I can at least categorize into what is best against each demon. Difficulty doesn't have to come from combat though, it can come from many places, like puzzles. One game I've loved is Faerun, which has enemies, sure, but combat is never really a thing. The game's all about exploration and puzzle solving, and none of the puzzles are too difficult. Most can be solved by further exploration, or just looking at clues in the immediate area. Even combat is more about exploration, looking for the correct enemy to level up on. On the other hand, I don't especially enjoy the puzzles in the Phoenix Wright games. I often found them too challenging to solve intuitively, and I end up just presenting everything I have until something works. Even when I've figured out the overall case, I often can't figure out what they want from me right at that moment. I got tired of presenting everything I had and started following a walkthrough, and by that point I was just going through the motions. I was no longer engaged in the gameplay, and it lost me. This doesn't necessarily mean it was too hard, but it was harder than I would enjoy. Difficulty can make me stop enjoying games I otherwise would have enjoyed. Both Untitled Story and Rex Rocket did this. They're first portrayed as Metroidvanias with a sense of exploration, and many fights or even mechanic stances, but traversal becomes very linear, as there's only one way to get to your destination, and that traversal just turns into difficult jumping puzzles. It's more about the challenge than the exploration. Tone is another important factor. Like I said, I play games to relax and have a good times, so I want to smile and laugh and enjoy myself. I'm not interested in games that try to be grim and dark and emotional. This is where Earthbound excels. Throughout the entire game it carried a joyful tone, even when it was being serious, all without being juvenile. By comparison, this is where Mother 3 lost my interest, as it tried to be much darker and more emotional. To a degree, this is even GU versus the original IMOQ, where GU was trying to be a little darker and edgier, whereas IMOQ, I just had a fun time playing. Now, in the same vein, and this is for personal reasons, I appreciate that there was almost no death in Earthbound. Enemies were defeated or turned back to normal, and even Everdread's fate was left ambiguous. The only death I can think of is Buzz. Games that toss death around like nothing, just killing off hordes of NPCs or even main characters, really bothers me, and I don't feel like it's required to get a point across. You do see a little more of this in the couple Dragon Quest games I've played than I'd prefer, but thankfully it wasn't bad enough to ruin my experience. As an aside, some games, like Doom or even the Mario games, don't bother me as much as you'd think because I stopped thinking of the enemies as living things. They're mostly just obstacles. That was a bit of a ramble, but I hope you took something from it. To be clear, this is absolutely not me saying what objectively makes a game good or bad, but this is me taking a good look at my own personal preferences in games. Maybe you've learned a little bit about how I tick. So what do you think? What kind of preferences do you have, and why? Think really in-depth about why you like it in some games, but not others, and let me know in the comments. Maybe you'll learn a bit about yourself.